There's Jim Morrison sitting on the couch. Then there's next to him is Jimi Hendrix. And next to Jimi Hendrix is Janis Joplin. Call it fate, but there's a seat next to Jim. No one was sitting in on the corner. It was a corner seat. So I had some set of balls. I mean, I was still very timid. I mean, my armpits were soaking wet. I was out of my league with all these people here. So I sit down with Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix. They're all these idols to me, and they're passing a joint. I said, when in Rome.
Welcome to Aircheck Season 5, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities. Listen as radio and TV's best on-air personalities, managers, owners, and consultants tell the tales of their storied careers with your hosts from Philadelphia, Rich DeSisto and Steve Raymond.
I'm Rich DeSisto.
And I'm Steve Raymond.
Our guest on this episode of Aircheck is an award-winning artist, an art director, a designer, and a photographer who's responsible for designing album covers for some of the music industry's finest. His name is Bob Heimall.
Bob Heimall wasn't just the art director at Elektra Records. He became the youngest art director in the music business at Elektra. From 1969 to the early 2000s, Bob's artistic voice, his vision, and the creativity of his hands are all over many album covers. In fact, if you own an album on vinyl from Carly Simon, Jim Croce, The Doors, Fred, Iggy Pop, and even Yoko Ono, then you've seen Bob's work. But which one was his first? He'll tell us that.
We're also going to hear about Bob's relationship with these musicians, including his first with Carly Simon in the winter of 1974 while she breastfed her son, his softball teammate Harry Chapin's Babe Ruth moment, the real story behind the guitar solo on the Doors' Roadhouse Blues, and if he could do it again, reveal what one artist with which he would love to work on another project.
Oh, and let's not forget about his book, which really illustrates it all. Cover stories, tales of rock legends, and the albums that made them famous.
Please welcome to Aircheck, Bob Heimall.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
So, Bob, take us back to those early Elektra record days. It's 1969. You're working at your new job with Elektra Records in New York City. Talk about how The Doors became a literal entry point to your career. From your first encounter with Jim Morrison blocking your doorway to your office, to the record release party of their Soft Parade album, and The Doors' infamous concert at the Fillmore East.
Well, I started Elektra Records in January. I just had a full job of working at Bloomingdale's in the Short Hills Mall in Livingston, New Jersey, believe it or not, because I couldn't get an advertising job. And my portfolio went to Elektra Records, and Bill Harvey, who was the art director, decided he liked my work, so he hired me. I got the job in January, February, March. The Doors were coming to town to promote their new album, The Soft Parade. And I was coming back from lunch one day, and there was this guy leaning against the doorway of the art department, so I couldn't get in. He was blocking the doorway, facing in, and he had a green lizard skin suit on. It looked like an alligator suit or some kind of weird green suit on, pants and boots and jacket, and the whole thing matched. It was green, and he was playing a flute. And I said, "Oh, who is this?" And I said, and I stepped over his leg, and I said, "Excuse me," and I turned around, and it was Jim Morrison.
Wow.
Now, I mean, that summer was the summer of Light My Fire that I just had been down the shore with, and that was my theme song the whole summer. I loved that song. And then I get this job, and here I walk in, and there's the guy who sang Light My Fire. I'm face to face with him, and it's like, whoa, what's this about? And it was so cool. I mean, I talked to him. I had a nice conversation with him. And
that's great.
The Doors were coming in from California for a party that we had at the New York Hilton, which was on 6th Avenue in the penthouse, to release the album Soft Parade. But they are also going to play the concert at the Fillmore East. And at the Hilton, everyone who was anyone in music were there. And I'm walking around with my drink, and there's a sunken living room with a curved couch around the hole. And there's Jimi Hendrix, there's Jim Morrison sitting on the couch. Then there's next to him is Jimi Hendrix, and next to Jimi Hendrix is Janis Joplin. And call it fate, but there's a seat next to Jim. No one was sitting in on the corner. It was a corner seat. So I had some set of balls. I mean, I was still very timid. I mean, my armpits were soaking wet. I was out of my league with all these people here. You know, this was like the first year I worked there, first 6 months. So I sit down with Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix. They're all these idols to me, and they're passing a joint. I said, when in Rome. So the four of us are smoking a joint together. And I never knew it at the time, but I look back at that and I said, wow, all three of them were dead within 2 years. And we were all the same age. We were all born in 1943. We were the same age. So I'm in the 43 club, or the 27-year-old club, they call it. After I had the joint, and after I sat down with them, I went over into the corner, had a cigarette and a glass of champagne. And I was looking up at the stars and I said, you have finally made it. You have made it. There's no higher. How can you get any higher than this? Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, drinking, penthouse, party, records, concerts, limousines. You got it, man. You made it. And that just sealed the deal. I loved music. I loved the Doors. I loved artwork. And it just all meshed together into what became a career. And it just started off that way. That next weekend, the party was during the week. That next weekend, the Doors were performing at the Fillmore East.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you realize it, but tonight you're in for a special treat.
So I went to the Fillmore East to photograph them. I had been there for a few Elektra acts previously, so I had my photographer's pit pass in the front of the stage, so I have the best seats, or best standing room in the house. And I'm down in the pits with a bunch of other photographers, and there's another photographer there that I didn't know. She was a female, and she just said her name was Lynn. We're bantering back and forth with her. I forget who the opening act was, because Jim Morrison and the Doors were the lead. And I took a lot of great pictures of Jim. In fact, one of my pictures of him from that performance is in the Absolutely Live album. Anyway, we had a good time. And during the performance or afterwards, this girl Linda comes up to me and she says, Bob, one of these days I'm going to marry one of these stars. I said, you mean the Doors? She said, no, not necessarily the Doors, but I'm going to marry a big one, trust me. So I said, sure, Linda, and I'm going to marry Linda Ronstadt. Just wait. And what happens was her name was Linda Eastman. And she married Paul McCartney within a year or two.
Wow.
Talk about how you became the apprentice at Elektra Records to then art director Bill Harvey and Elektra Records owner Jack Holtzman.
Well, I started working with Bill Harvey as his assistant. He was the art director, and he would assign album covers to a photographer, like he would assign photographers in LA to take a picture of the Doors, or in New York to take a picture of someone else. Bill Harvey hired me as a production artist and designer, which means I had to take all his designs and make them ready for printing. They call them doing paste up and mechanical. So I started doing that. Jack Holtzman was an interesting guy. He was a good friend of mine. He helped me in other things in life so much. I've known him all my life since then. And Bill Harvey was noticing that he had Elektra Records now for 10 years. He started in the early 60s, I think. And Jack was starting to lose it in a way that the company was getting so big. And Bill said, I got to help Jack. I got to get into management of the company, which is going to take me away from doing the art. So I'm going to start giving you more and more stuff. Then he started testing me. He said, okay, you take this. This is the artwork. You make a cover out of it. You design the front, you design the back. And he started doing that with me with every project. He was still art director, and he was coming up with the ideas. He was assigning the photographers and the artists and the painters. But then when they would come in, he'd give them to me to design. That was the first step. And one of the first ones I did was the Holy Modal Rounders. And I blew his mind with that, because I did something that no one ever did before. I I covered the beautiful illustration with all typography. And he said, wow, I wasn't expecting that, but it's awesome. And I just started doing creative things, because to me it was like a new venue, a new way to do things. A year later, I was made art director because I did a cover for the Doors, 13, and Morrison was so affected by how I sold them the cover I wanted and didn't use the cover the band wanted. He went right into Jack and he said, that guy you got in the art department, Bob Heimall, hold on to him. He's good.
Wow.
And, right after that, I was promoted to art director, and Bill gave the whole 9 yards to me. So I started working on it.
What was it about your idea that made the difference?
Yeah, that's Doors 13 cover. They came in with a cover where they were mystically around a table with some kind of idol in the middle, and it looked like they were in a seance. And I said, this isn't going to work. I mean, I said it to myself. I didn't say it to them because Jim Morrison wasn't featured. The band at that time were envious of Morrison. You know, they were all talented, but they did not like it that Jim was out front. It was the Doors. It was the four of them, not just Jim. They were personally jealous that Jim was out front. And I mean, I'm telling it like it is. And Ray Manzarek was not like that. Ray knew the whole story. But anyway, when they came into the office and they showed me the cover they had, I didn't like it. And I think I even printed that in the book. But I used it for a back cover, and I came up with something that was better, and I sold them on it. And I remember they were in the office, and the four of them were sitting there, and I was showing them what I wanted to do. And then Ray, who was really the spokesman for the group, said, okay, guys, what do you think? Robbie, what do you think? He says, I'm okay with it. Then he asked Densmore, what do you think? He said, it's fine with me. And he asked Jim, he said, good with me. And that was it. It was sold. I talked them out of their cover, and they were one of the biggest groups at the time.
Bob, I picture myself holding an album. I pull the inner sleeve out, put the vinyl record on the turntable, drop the needle, hear the crackle and pop before the first song, and then in front of me in awe, looking at the artwork. Walk us through the anatomy of an album cover and how the process works for you. Talk about the different parts and what parts you were typically responsible for when it came to the artwork.
They had the inner sleeve, which sometimes had lyrics on it, sometimes it didn't. It just had a generic Elektra sleeve with Elektra logos on it. You had a front cover I had to design, and a back cover I had to design. Now, this was at a time where Bill Harvey was basically the designer. I was the first art person to go into the Elektra art department, and I started doing paste-up mechanicals. Paste-up mechanicals are literally pasting up pictures in black and white and pasting the typesetting that you get. You get real pristine prints of the type that you use, and you have to put glue on it and paste it down in position over the photograph of a black and white, over a photostat of the cover. So everything is in position. Then you send that to the printer with the original art or slide or illustration, whatever it is. Like on the Doors, we had a picture for the front, a photo for the back, and an illustration by Peter Schaumann for the inside. So all of those original art things were sent to the printer with my black and white art. And what they do is they transpose what they call color separations. They separate the color into the 4 process colors, which is blue, which is really cyan, and red, and then yellow and black. And they make 3 plates, and they print a proof. Then they send that proof to me or to Bill to be approved. And at that stage, we see, okay, his face is too dark, or the background is too dark, the background is too light. This is out of focus. This is not right. This doesn't look good. And we get a chance to mark it up to make it perfect. So they send the final proof to us, and we okay it. And then they can send the 4 color negatives to the printer, and the printer will, from the negatives, make 4 plates: a black plate, a yellow plate, a cyan plate, and a red plate. The red is called magenta. Also, it's cyan and magenta. Cyan is the blue, and magenta is red in printing terms.
And for those who may not be familiar with the other terminology in the vinyl record world, what's a gatefold?
A gatefold, it opens up. Now, that sometimes, usually, gatefolds were for 2 record sets. But with the Doors' Soft Parade, it was just 1 record. The front flap was sealed. So you open the gatefold up, and you get a full spread, a 12 by 24 inch piece of artwork, usually, sometimes with lyrics on it. But in the Doors' Soft Parade, there were no lyrics on the inside or the back. I don't know if the lyrics were on the inner sleeve or not. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But anyway, the Doors' lyrics are always pretty clear. Jim was clear. He didn't hide anything, literally.
And when an artist is recording an album, making an album, who decides what type of album cover the project will get?
The record company. The marketing department, usually Jack Holzman, the president. He knows how much money he paid the artist to sign him. He knows how money he's going to do. He's heard the record. He has an idea of what it wants to sell and how much more he wants to give the consumer. Obviously, if you print a gatefold, it's costing more money. I started something at Elektra, and it was gradual. It didn't start until the next year. But without any of them knowing it, I started increasing the packaging costs by die cuts and printing on the inside sleeve. So you pull out the inner sleeve and there was a die cut in the front and it would secretly reveal another picture printed inside that was framed. And I did all kinds of crazy things. Like the third album I designed was Carly Simon, first Carly Simon album, titled Carly Simon.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You have a special bond with Carly Simon.
Jack Holtzman signed Carly Simon. I didn't know who Carly Simon was. I later found out that she was the daughter of Peter Simon, who was the head of the NARIS, the National Artistic Recording Society of the record business, like the Oscars of the record business, where they give out the Grammys. And her father was also the co-owner of Simon & Schuster Publishing.
Right.
And I was told that she was doing radio commercials, singing jingles with her sister. She had a brother and a sister. They were doing jingles, and I heard some of the jingles, and they were really good. So she had a good voice. So they set up a meeting with me and Carly to come into the office, and she brought her brother with her. Why, I didn't know until we got into it. I said, "What are we going to do for a cover, Carly?" She said, "Well, I brought my brother Peter in. I'm not pushing him, but he is a photographer and he has taken pictures of me." And she didn't force it on me. She said, "I'd just like you to look at the photographs that Peter did and if they would work with you for the cover." I said, "Okay, let me look at them." And I didn't propose anything else. I said, "I'll give him a chance. Let me look at the pictures." And I saw one of her sitting on the couch. I called Peter up and I asked him if I could make a print of that one. And he said, "Sure." So I sent it out for a print. And when the print came back, I hand colored it. It was a black and white print, but I wanted color in it. So I didn't want a black and white for Carly. So I took my magic markers and I did some tinting of it. They had to tint her dress. She was wearing a lace dress. I had to tint the seat cover of the sofa. I had to tint the drapes in the back, and I put it together. And then I picked a picture of her. I think the other picture on the back she did send a few color slides. Yeah, it was a color slide of Carly's face, and it's not the best picture of Carly, but for some reason, I liked it. The picture on the back is the Carly I met when she walked into my office. She wasn't the star yet. She was just like me. It was an average picture. I don't even like saying that now, but it was what I thought of Carly. I put it together and I called her into the office. So she came in, she looked at it. She said, "I thought these were black and white, Bob. Peter didn't take color of this." I said, "No, they were black and white. I hand colored it." She puts her hand on my shoulder and puts her hand over and she says, "I can't believe it." I said, "What?" She said, "You matched every single color exactly the way they were in the room when Peter took the picture." Wow. I said, "You're kidding me. I didn't know that." She said, "Bob, you don't know. That's just so special to me." And she just gave me a hug and she said, "I like it." and from there on, we just were like, Carly and I got along real well. Wow. And that album cover, by the way, was the first album cover ever printed that wasn't on regular paper. I found this special paper. It was paper, but it was painted with, it was a paper that was like a cloth. They did it was a new release of paper, that printing paper. And if you look at it, it was textured. It was printed like cloth. It was like printing on cloth, and it was pink. So it matched one of the colors on the photograph. And it was matte. It wasn't glossy like normal album covers. So I had some estimates done, and it was about probably a few cents more, maybe 5 cents more per album to print. And I didn't ask permission. I just showed it to her, and I printed it, and I couldn't believe how successful it was. It was just great. And she came in again for anticipation with her brother. And again, Peter took some photographs. And there was this one photograph of her standing with her arms out like this and her legs spread wide, see-through dress, holding these gates like she was anticipating something big. And I said, "That's a cover shot." So I had it printed, and I had it printed in the black and white film, like a transparent film. And I asked Carly to come in, and I showed it to her on the board, and she loved it. When it was printed, I called and left a message with her manager, Arlene Rothberg, that her cover was in if she wanted to come and see it. I had it here. So I had left early for the weekend. It was a holiday weekend. She came in and she saw it, and she wrote me this note that I still have framed, that she signed it "Worship, Carly." I just love this, the way the colors reflected. You did it again, and all kinds of nice things. I'm not going to brag. It was just nice.
You also did work on our album, No Secrets, right?
Yes.
Talk about that album cover and that photo.
We had to send a photographer. I couldn't use her brother on this because the producer she had was Richard Perry. He was a top producer at the time, and they were recording in London. And Cat Stevens was at the recording session. Mick Jagger did background vocals on "You're So Vain," and it was a real big deal. Jack just went all out on this one. The producer, Richard Perry, was a big shot. And he told Jack, I don't want to use her brother's photographs. I want a good photographer. Send them to England, and we do it. So I called another friend that I had met through Bill Harvey, called Ed Caraff. He was a photographer in California. So I flew Ed from California to London, and he followed Carly around for the day. And there was this shot of her that's just a classic. And the funny part of it is, it showed her nipples on her shirt.
Yeah.
She loved the cover. And then we had Richard Perry and her. Both of them had to come in to approve the cover. So I had that one, and on the back cover, I picked another shot that Ed Caraff had taken in London. And Richard looked at the front and he said, I love it. He looked at the back and he said to me, I'm not crazy about the back cover. Could we change that? And I said, okay, Richard, I'll do you a favor. I said, I will change the back cover picture if you will add some more strings and a little volume on the bass on cut 3 on side 2. And we got to trade, okay? He said, Bob, touche. It's the way you want it. That's the way it is. You do your job, I'll do mine. And that to me was a feather in my cap. I finally got the chutzpah to stand up to someone that was really a star and say, no, I want it my way. And it worked. Well, anyway, the next time I did a cover for Carly, I left Elektra Records after that. And I went to, I guess it was about 9 years later, I had my own studio. And Carly's manager, Harlene Rothberg, called me again. Now, this is 10 years later, after she had about 3 or 4 other albums with different art directors. And she had signed with a new label, and she remembered me. And Marlene said, Carly wants to work with you on this one. Can you do the cover? I said, sure, I'd love to do it. Carly had her own photographer again, not her brother this time, another lady. Karen Frank was her name, and she took Carly around for a day and did a beautiful photo session for the cover Spy. And the title of it was Spy. So the photos come in, I see what I like, I listen to the music for 2 weeks intensely, play it at home, play it in the office, play it in the car. I really got into the music. I selected the photographs that I thought was right. And on the inside, it's basically her in a naked shot. The photographer, Karen, did some shots of her naked, totally naked, which were kind of weird. But, well, after a while, you get used to it when you're looking at this little loop, and so what? I'm not going to use them. I'm not going to put them out there. But anyway, I put something together, and I called Arlene, and I said, Arlene, I've got Carly's package together. Do you want her to come in and see it? She said, Bob, do me a favor. She's in New York at her apartment. Her and James are married now, and they have their son, Benjamin. Here's the address. Call her and see what's a good time. So I called Carly, and she said, come on down. Carly answers the door. She's holding Benjamin. She says, okay, come on in, Bob. And she walks me into the kitchen. She said, Bob, this is James. James, this is Bob. I shake James Taylor's hand. He's eating his cereal. And Carly says, James, would you please take Benjamin while I deal with Bob with the album cover? And he says, no, go do it yourself. Or something like that. And
wow.
I just couldn't believe it. Anyway, we go into the living room, and Carly's got a breast seat. She takes out her boob, and she's breastfeeding Benjamin. And here I am going after the album cover, and I look up and I say, Am I really here? Is this really going on? Am I watching Carly Simon breastfeed with James Taylor in the other room eating breakfast as Cheerios? And I said, wow, the things that I went through and experienced were so cool. When I look back at it now, it's like people don't believe it.
Right. Bob, you mentioned a few times now how you're always drawn to the music of the artists who you work with, either during or before the artwork concepts were even born. Talk more about that, because the romance of the vinyl record, for those of us who've experienced it, it is about the cover art, the liner notes, the pictures, while listening to the music. And it's fascinating that you kind of almost reverse engineer the process from the music lover's perspective in order to guide you towards an idea. So tell us a little bit more about that process.
I had worked previously, the previous 5 years after getting out of art school, in all agencies, art advertising agencies and design studios. And the stuff I was designing and creating artwork for meant nothing to me. I had to design labels for liquor bottles, for deodorant. I mean, so what? I mean, I'm going to test 5 deodorants and see which one's best and get the smell and get the flavor of that and the color. I mean, that wasn't me. But all of a sudden, 2 things were happening. I was able to express my inner artistic talents graphically, and I was getting more into music.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really getting into the music. Like Jack Holtzman said, it's follow the music. In his book that he wrote, it's follow the music. And I was literally following the music. I would take every cassette that they got from the studio, and I would just take that and bring it with me for 2 weeks and listen to it nonstop in the car, at home, at night, in the morning. That would play it all day in the office.
Cool.
And I got so into it that I thought every artist Elektra signed was the best, and I would pick a song on each one that would be the hit. And I'd have these printers come in, like the printers I was telling you about, AGI, and I'd be listening to this song for like 2 weeks, like Carly Simon, You're So Vain. I was listening to that song for 2 weeks on the album, and I said, there's no way that's not a number one single. And then I go into the marketing department, the people who market, the sales promotion guys who go to the radio stations and want the DJs to play it. I said, I guarantee you that is a number one single if you guys do your job. And they said, okay, we'll bet you a beer. And they wrote a letter. They all signed it saying this is not going to be a number one single. I said, well, I bet it's going to be. And it was number one. And I still have the note that they all signed that said it would be a number one singles if you guys do your job. And it worked out. What I'm saying is the music was what I was following, like Jack said. And every artist I got, I wanted to get into their music. I mean, I loved their music. I know many other art directors at record companies over the years, even some of the guys who took my place when I left. And from what I heard, every record album cover was just another cover. They'd hire a photographer, or they'd look at the title, they'd listen to the hit song, and they'd do something with it. They didn't take it home and live with it for 2 weeks like I did. And very few art directors did that. I mean, I'm not saying I'm special, but that's how important the music was to me. And that to me helped my success in that there's not one album cover I did where the artist didn't like it. In other words, they were happy with it. And I feel that from me interpreting who they were, what their music was, and what they were selling was spot on with my packaging. So
let's go back to 1972, another album of art you were commissioned to create for the band Bread. Talk about how you applied your technique to that task.
Okay, the first album for Bread, I found out from Bill Harvey. He did the art director. He was still art director he was just changing, but he wanted to do Bread because Bread was a big signing. Bread were all these well-known studio musicians. Jimmy Griffin was the guitarist. He wrote Guitar Man, and you had Larry Nichtel and Mike Botts, I think, played bass. And these guys were all top session guys in LA. They were on every single record you had. You look at all the records and their names are on it, but they decided to make their own group and make some bread. That's the way Bill saw it. But David Gates, the leader of the band, didn't get through to Bill that it wasn't about money. It was about manna. It was about the bread that God gives you, okay? Now, Bill did the first cover. Bill did the second cover. The third cover was for manna. And I wasn't a Christian. I didn't know about manna. I mean, I didn't even know what manna meant. It means bread from heaven. But anyway, he sent me out to California to take a picture to photograph the band. Now, this was my first big job photographing a known band. The first two albums were hits. The bread just kept having hit after hit after hit. So I was going with a known item here now. And the two previous album covers had stone professional photographer, Frank Bez. He was one of the best in the business. He was in the business so long, he's got all the old movie star pictures of all the old movie stars we saw in the 40s and the 50s. He was the best, in my opinion, the best. I learned so much going on a photo session with him. So anyway, I go out to take a picture of Bread, and I go to David Gates' house, and I think that the title of it was I Want to Make It With You.
Yeah.
So I said, Frank, do me a favor. If you have any pictures of a girl running naked on a hill somewhere, just take it and send it to me. I'm going to do a mock-up. So I made a print of a cover of this girl running up this hill to a tree down the horizon. And you can see she's naked because it's close enough to see, but it's a silhouette. I show it to David and his wife sitting on the kitchen table, and they both look at it and they don't say anything. And David finally says, Bob, I don't think that's going to work. We're sort of religious. We're both Mormons, and I really don't want to put that on the cover for our group. I said, okay. I spent 2 weeks coming up with this idea. Here we are on square one. What are we going to do? They said, well, you got your camera with you. I said, that was in case that they didn't like the cover because Frank would have done it. And I said, we have to take pictures. They said, I don't even know where to go. I'm not from LA. I mean, I've been out here a few times, but not taking pictures. And they said, okay, we know of a mission about an hour away from David's house. There was an old mission there. So we went there to take pictures. So I spent the whole day with the group taking pictures. I must have taken about 300 photographs. And at that time, you're dealing with cameras with film. So I had, after 36 pictures, I had to change, rewind the roll, put another one in and take the picture. No, you couldn't see the picture right away. So, I mean, it was all a guessing game. I mean, I spent, the whole day taking hundreds of pictures. And it was, you go back and you send them to the processing and they come back and you've got nothing. You've wasted the plane fare, the hotel fee. I mean, you didn't know. At least now you can see it. I took these pictures and I started putting them together. And I said, there's something neat here that I want to do. I'm going to try something that's never been done before. And that's a 3-gate fold where you put one fold and then another fold over the top of it. So as you look at the cover, you see one image, then you open it and it reveals another image. Then you open that and you get a third image. And then you pull the sleeve out and you get another image. Cool. So I'm really giving you 4 different insights to the music and the artist and the soul and what they're selling. I put it all together and I showed it to someone in the marketing department. He said, Bob, how did you find a place with these shapes of bread? I said, what do you mean? He said, all these arches in the mission here are all shapes like slices of bread. I looked at it and I said, I can't believe it. You're right. That was not intentional. I mean, wow. I didn't even know it, but I'm shooting every picture of the band bed through a slice of bread.
Wow.
Everyone loved the cover. It was a natural. And that's one of the covers, by the way, that after it sold so many albums, on reprinting it, they didn't print gatefolds. They just took the front cover and photographed it and printed that. One sleeve, one album. So, I mean, that's another way of saving money.
And then a year later, this next project comes with a sad ending. In 1973, you were asked to design the cover for Jim Croce's 5th album, I Got a Name. Talk about your meeting with Jim in September of 73, and subsequently, how did you hear about the plane crash 2 weeks later?
At the time I was working I was the art director at Elektra, and Terry Cashman and Tommy West, who produced Jim Croce, they were the producers of Jim Croce when he was on ABC. They started their own company, Lifesong Records, and they called me up and they said, Bob, we're starting our own company. It's Lifesong Records. We'd like you to do a logo for our label, but we also want you to do the cover for Jim. Jim, we've been producing Jim for ABC, but we have signed him to our label. We want you to do the cover. And I was working for Elektra at that time. I asked Bill Harvey, who was my boss, I said, Bill, can I do a freelance job? And I explained everything to him. He said, sure, go ahead. You, as long as it doesn't interfere with the work you're doing here, do it. Like a week later, Terry and Tommy called me up and said, we want you to meet with Jim in the Hotel Essex and just go over a cover idea for him. Well, I went to the hotel room with Jim. He gets on his bed with his guitar and he plays me the whole album. Just him playing acoustic guitar. He sang me every song in the album from beginning to end, which was incredible. He had me hooked. So he left and he said, I'm going on tour tomorrow. I'm leaving for Texas. That was his last concert. He died on an airplane leaving that concert the night before. And then I was driving in on the Merritt Parkway and I got Pete Fornatale on. And he just said, we just got a news flash or a news break that Jim Croce died in an airplane accident last night after his concert last night in Texas. I just pulled over. I couldn't deal with it. I got all choked up and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, wait a minute. I just saw the guy a week ago. He sang me his whole album and I'm working on his album cover. And that's what I'm going in to do now. And he's dead. And I just pulled over and I cried. Wow. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I just cried. I just broke down and cried. It was just, I couldn't deal with it. I mean, Morrison was already dead. I think Joplin was dead at the time. I don't know if Hendrix was dead yet either, but all of a sudden this was number 4 on the list. And I'm saying, what's going on here? Now I'm working with one of the stars another star that's dead. So I get into my office. And the night before, I had put all those pictures on my desk. And there I'm looking at all the pictures of Jim Croce that my photographer, Benno Friedman, just sent me. And it was just, I couldn't do anything. I was just paralyzed. Even my staff says, I know a couple guys that were in my art department then. They said, we couldn't deal with you that day. You were so upset. You were just, it really affected you. And I just had to put everything on hold. I couldn't think. And, then the next day I come in, I had to finish the job, design a cover, and go on with life. But that was a tough one.
Your book, entitled Cover Stories, Tales of Rock Legends and the Albums That Made Them Famous, is filled with photos of the album covers you designed and their stories. But it's not just a book about music. It's your autobiography. You talk a lot about your younger years, living in Cape May, New Jersey, your love of surfing, your Porsche, Talk about those early formative years. Where you're from, and did you become what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Okay, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, and my parents lived in East Orange, New Jersey, until I was about 5 years old. And then we moved to Livingston, New Jersey, a more affluent suburb. My dad was a plumber, and he had his own business. He moved from working for someone in East Orange to his own business in Livingston, New Jersey, and he wound up being very successful. He had a whole fleet of trucks, and he had five guys working for him. And he always told me he wanted me to be his assistant or his helper. And he would name it. He would change the trucks to say Bob Lewis R. Heimall and Son Plumbing and Heating. So one summer I worked for him as a plumber's assistant. And he said, "Now listen, son, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to give you anything sweet out of the box because you're the boss's son. You're going to start from scratch and do all the dirty work, messenger stuff, clean up, all the dirty work." So he brings me to this development, and Livingston was just growing by leaps and bounds. They were putting developments in, where they make all the houses the same in a big plot of land, and they call them developments then. He says, "Okay, what you're going to do today is you're going to go around to all the houses. None of them are occupied. I've put all the toilets and everything are in, and I want you to start cleaning up everything." So I go in and I start cleaning up, and I realize that people in the neighborhood, kids, have gone in and they've used the toilets. And I had to clean. I don't want to tell you how many toilets I had to clean out. Anyway, it sort of soured me on being a plumber. Earlier, when I was younger, about 8 years old, I got into painting. I bought a John Nagy painted home kit where you put a piece of film on a TV screen and you draw what he drew and copy it and fill in colors and stuff. And I got into art very much. So I asked for a painting set for one Christmas when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I did my first oil painting. So when I was in high school and I started working for my dad, I was also, the only subject I liked in high school was art. I hated everything else. And I worked on the stage crew, and I would take metal shop, wood shop, auto shop, anything not to take a college prep course. And I got through high school by faking it. I mean, I got C's basically. I only got an A in art, and I loved art. When I got out of high school, I wanted to go to art school. And the best art schools in the country were Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and Rhode Island School of Design in Rhode Island. So I made appointments for all three. And they said, "Bob, you got great artwork. You're a talented artist, but we can't accept you to our school." I said, "Why?" It's because you didn't take algebra, a language, trigonometry, this and that. And I said, "Well, what does that got to do with art?" He said, "Well, you didn't take a college prep course. We're a college. We give a degree. And to get a degree, you've got to take these courses." I said, "Well, okay." So my mom found an art school in Newark, New Jersey called Newark School of Fine Industrial Art. And it was a public school. The top of it was a public school for graduates of the lower school. The lower school was Arts High School. All the high school students in Newark, the whole city of Newark, went to there if you had some kind of art talent, whether it was dancing, music, instruments, art, whatever. And then if you wanted to, you could go to the trade school on top and learn more about the trade. So I went to there for 3 years, and it was really a blessing. But after that 3 years of high school, I became eligible for the draft. Ooh. I did not want to go to Vietnam. I had asthma when I was a child, so I had my doctor write a note to the draft board, and fortunately they accepted the fact that I had asthma and I couldn't deal with cold climates or I have an asthmatic attack, so I was given a 1Y, I think it was, whatever it was, where I was ineligible for the draft. So I started getting jobs. And for 5 summers, the first summer out of art school, my parents had a house down in the Villas, New Jersey, which they had to buy when I was 5 years old because I had asthma, going back to that. And the doctor said, because of his asthma and all his allergies, I would suggest moving to Arizona where the air is drier and there's not so much dampness and mildew and all that stuff. Or you could try the Jersey Shore for a summer or two and see how that works. So they went down and they bought a house in Cape May, New Jersey. We went down there every summer since I was 5 years old, and I loved it. I mean, I loved the ocean, I loved the water, I loved the atmosphere down here. After the art school thing, I got the job at Elektra. I would work in the wintertime at an ad agency, and I had an advertising headhunter. She would get me jobs. She'd take my portfolio and send it around. She had gotten me all my jobs by sending my portfolio to different agencies. And every job I got, it was from her sending me there with my portfolio.
Cool.
So she said, I got another one for you. I just got finished with Bloomingdale's for the winter and Christmas at the Livingston Mall, which doesn't exist anymore. And she sent my portfolio to Elektra Records. So I sent it there. A week later, Bill Harvey calls me up. I said, I'd like you to come in and talk. I said, okay, I'll come in. My portfolio was there for a week. So I go in and he said, I like your work and I'd like to hire you. And this is that. He gave me a price, I said, it's fine with me. I didn't have work. I needed a job. So I was living with my parents at the time, and it was about a 45-minute commute to the city by bus. And I took the job, and it all started from there.
You mentioned WNEW-FM. Pete Fornatale was on your radio when you learned about Jim Croce's plane crash. 1973 was a turning point for FM radio, a big shift from AM. But you had a liking to the AM radio as well as a kid. Talk about what attracted you to radio, and who did you listen to, and how did it affect you?
When I was born, my dad was in Europe for World War II. I mean, my mom got pregnant before he left. He was drafted. He was in Europe. And basically, for the first 3 years of my life, I was without a father. But my mom always played music. She played all the big band sounds, the swing music. And I got into it. I loved it. She played it all day long, and I really enjoyed it. I'd always had a radio in the car, and I turned it up and got into it. Pete Fornatale, who was the girl? Allison Steele. I loved Allison Steele. Even the other guy, the big Cousin Brucey. I met Cousin Brucey once. I mean, I used to love Cousin Brucey.
Jack Holtzman wrote the foreword for your book. He said, encouraging an appetite for purchase became the responsibility of the front cover art and the enticement of the accompanying notes. That really says it all. I mean, what was it like working for Jack and subsequently for Clive Davis?
Night and day. Night and day. Jack Holtzman was a friend of mine. He wasn't just the president of my company. He was a friend of mine. When he quit Elektra, when he resigned from Elektra, he sold it to Warner Communications. He moved to California, and he bought a house on Maui. And he was a higher up in Warner Elektra Records. And he forged a business with Pioneer Electronics, who came out with QuadSound, the Quadradisc. We had stereo when I was there, but he was working on Quad, where you had 4 speakers and 4 tracks. I designed the Quadradisc logo, and I did a lot of records for Quadradisc. But Jack was moving up in the world and away from regular just recordings, and he moved to Hawaii. Jack recommended me to Clive. Clive hired me, and it was night and day. I mean, it was working for it. I was in a different world. Totally different world. When I worked for Clive, it was Bell Records. He took over Bell Records, and eventually it was going to be his own company. He could name it, and he was being funded by the people who owned it, Bell, or whoever it was at the time, I forget. And Clive, unlike Jack, wanted to be involved in everything. He wanted me to show everything. He wanted me and the artist and him to be like this, and then he would be involved in the cover selection, the cover design, and the cover everything. And he wouldn't even let me do advertising at Elektra. I did all the advertising beside the album covers. That was my job. I did it from incept to concept to everything. It was all my idea. At Arista Records, he hired someone else to do it because he could tell them what to do. And to be honest with you, I never liked the advertising. And I told him, I said, Clive, we should do the advertising in-house. We'll have classier ads. But anyway, he started as Bell Records, and he named it, he was going to name his company Arista Records. And it was my job to come up with the corporate ID, the logo of the company. So I came up with it, the Arista Records logo. He loved it. And we had, the opening weekend, the opening week of Arista Records, they had a 2-page spread in Billboard, Record World, and Cashbox, all the trade magazines, and I think even Rolling Stone, where they were going to have an ad announcing Arista Records with the logo and all the people there. I had my picture in it. They had all the employees of the new record company. It was called the New Record Company with Arista Record, and Clive's picture was there, and all my picture was there. I still have the spread. I don't know where it is. We had it, and it was the Monday before the week it was going to print, and we had a meeting in his office. Every Monday morning, Clive Davis would have an executive meeting. All the executives of the company, art department, everything. Everyone was in the meeting, and he'd go over the week's projects, a week's worth. And all of us had to get Record World, Cashbox, and Billboard sent to our homes, and we had to be read up on it by Monday morning. If you didn't do it, you'd be on his bad list. I mean, I wasn't into it totally. I was into the music. I wasn't really into the selling part of it. But anyway, I come in there on a Monday morning after I had given him all the layouts and everything to take home. He wanted to show his wife, which wives have always been a problem in my part of the business, because an artist would show their wives and they might not like a color or the way the package was going. And I not only had to sell it to the artist and his manager and to my sales department, but I had to sell it to the wife or the girlfriend or whoever else was a part of it. Anyway, he comes in, and with everyone in the room, he says, okay, we're running with these ads next week in the 3 trades, right? I said, okay, Bob, we're going to change the color. I said, what? He said, yeah, we're going to change the color. I mean, what do you mean change the color? This is the color I picked. This we've been working on this for 3 months. This color's been there. All the trades are ready for it. Well, I showed my wife, and she picked this color. He hands me a little swatch of blue, and he says, my wife wants this color. I hit the fan.
Wow.
I mean, I blew it in front of the whole record company. I said, no way. Well, you can't do that. You just can't arbitrarily pick a color. There's a reason I picked that color. And I was flipping out. And Gordon Bosson at the time was a vice president in charge of sales. He comes up behind me, he says, Bob, calm down. He's the president. Bob, he's patting me, he's saying, calm down, Bob. Calm down, Bob. He's the president. And I wasn't calming down because at Elektra Records, I got my way. I mean, I had my way. I had final say in every album cover. Except if Jack or Bill got a complaint from the artist, they would change it, but it never happened. No one ever overruled me on an album cover. All of a sudden, I'm being overruled on a month's or 2 months worth of work of this corporate image. Everything was colored and ready to go into the printers. So finally, I had to acquiesce. He was, like Gordon said, he was the printer. And from that moment on, I never got along with Clive. I worked with him for 7 years. I must have done something right, but he was different. He was into the marketing and the business part of the music business, and Jack was into the artist part of the music business. He literally would sign an artist because of the music, not with its potential to sell necessarily until he got bigger and he had a big company and employees to support. Then his mind turned to the money, and it's one of the reasons he quit. He told me when I said, Jack, why are you leaving? He said, Bob, I can't handle that. I can't handle the phone. He said, I'm leaving. The basic reason is it's the phone. I can't get off the phone. I'm on the phone 24/7 talking about some kind of problem somewhere. And I don't like it. It takes me away from the music.
Record companies are about relationships, the relationships you have with the artist. The reason I left was managers coming to me and say, from now on, you deal with me. We're going to give you the record. We're going to give you the cover. Your job is to finance it and to distribute it and to market it. Not for me. That's not why I wanted to do this. I wanted to work with the artist. And if they thought that we as surrogates for the audience had nothing to offer the artist, then they should go elsewhere. That's ultimately the reason I left the business. Was the galoots, the galoots are kind of like hoodlums, were coming to the party, and I just didn't want to deal with them.
For those of you who might not know, Bob is also a big fan of softball. In fact, he started a softball league in Central Park years back. Steve and I were big players in our radio station softball team back in the day at WZXL, a radio station, Bob, you might be familiar with, living in Cape May County, New Jersey. But we didn't have big names other than ourselves swinging the bat. How did you get Harry Chapin to join the Elektra Records softball team?
Harry, I was working on it. Jack just signed the Harry Chapin, and they were going to call the album Taxi because that was going to be the hit single. And that was the time when Jack peeped in after he signed him, and he said, we got to go all the way on this one. I'm putting out a lot of money signing Harry.
Elektra never lost an artist to a major label in a negotiation. In the case of Harry Chapin, who was also going to Columbia and told me he was going to Columbia, I smarted for a week because I did not have that artist. And I finally came in early one Sunday morning and said, I'm at the airport and I'm coming to your house and I'm not leaving your house until I've convinced you to sign with Elektra. And that's exactly what I did.
And Harry would come to my office once in a while. He lived in Long Island and he'd commute to the city. And when he was in the city, he'd come up to my art department because we had a pool table, and we had a cover on the pool table that was basically an artwork place during the day. And after the work, we would take off the cover, we'd take out the pool sticks, and all the executives from all the departments would come in. We'd take out some Coors from my icebox that we had shipped in from California, because you couldn't buy Coors in the East Coast at that time. But my supplier, AGI, who was so good to me, like payola, they would supply me with the Coors from my refrigerator, and we would just play pool. So one night we're playing pool, and it was like 5:00, and I said, okay, I got to go now. I went in my office, and I come out of my office dressed in a softball uniform, and Harry was playing with us and all the other guys. He says, where are you going? I said, I got a softball team. He says, you have a softball team? I said, yeah. And he said, hey, can you get me in the game? I said, Harry, what are you? You're a guitar player. He said, Bob, if you let me play, I guarantee you I'll hit a home run.
Wow.
I said, come on, Harry. He said, I guarantee it. I said, how can I not say yes to that? He's an artist. First of all, I got to make him happy. And, I said, okay, we got a game next Tuesday at 5:30. We're going to be playing WABC Records, WABC company. And come on, I'll get you a shirt. So I got him a shirt, Elektra shirt. We go down to the park, and the catcher on ABC was Geraldo Rivera. What a mouth that guy had. I mean, I'm up at bat, and he's chopping away trying to put me down and make me nervous. Anyway, it was just very interesting. It was Geraldo Rivera catching when Harry Chapin comes up to bat. Harry Chapin comes up to bat, and he hits a home run with 2 men on base or something like that. I don't know how many. But it was the only game we won the whole year, and he hit a home run, just like Babe Ruth did when he pointed. I said, you can't make that up. You can't make that up.
You talk about big names. How did your paths cross with Yoko Ono? What work did you do for her?
John was dead, and I started working at Polydor Records. Not Polydor, AGI, Album Graphics, and they had a contract to do all of Polydor Records. After about a year or two, when the music business was changing from LPs to CDs, Album Graphics, who I gave the start at Elektra Records, I gave them some big jobs and print. They did the die cuts for bread. They did the printing on fabric for Carly Simon, Anticipation. They did all the first things that were ever done. A lot of die cuts and printing on the sleeves that you would reel a picture when you pulled it out. I got AGI started, and they were really big. Well, in the late 70s, it was changing, and they were doing CDs. Moving to CD. The LP was moving to CDs, and AGI was losing business, and they didn't want to carry the art department anymore. So they asked me if they could set me up in business. So they gave me all the art equipment, and we rented a place down the street, and they started me out. And one of the first jobs was to work with Yoko Ono at Polydor. She had signed with Polydor. I forget which artwork it was, but there was a picture where I had to retouch and put a picture of Sean, Yoko, and John together. There was none of the three of them together. It was the back cover for one of her albums, not the one of John and Yoko. Milk and Honey. That was that they weren't on the back cover of Milk and Honey. I had to airbrush the rest of the pond in at Central Park. That was a narrow shot. But if you look at the back cover of Milk and Honey, the right of it's all retouched in because that was a vertical shot. But I had to retouch Sean and Yoko into a picture with John so they'd be together as a family in one of her album covers. I forget which one, but that was cool. Yeah, I met Yoko before I even knew her. She used to eat at Hide, Hide, a Japanese restaurant on West 56th Street, New York, that when I was at Elektra Records, I'd go to lunch with AGI, and they'd treat me all the time to lunch there once a week. Great sushi. Anyway, she would eat there too once a week. We almost picked the same day. I never talked to her, met her, or tapped her on the shoulder when I was in there, but I'd always walk by her and like, hey, hi, Yoko, to myself. But it was amazing that 10 years later, I was working with her.
Yeah.
Bob, I don't think you can find anyone who has worked in the music business that didn't have a love of music itself. You've expressed your passions for the art form in more ways than one. Of course, it complemented your career. What about Bob the music fan? Is there an album cover you didn't work on that you love?
I only bought one album cover because of the cover. And this is when I first started working at Elektra. Probably it was the first year, 68 or 69. I forget when it was released. It was the band, Music from Big Pink. Okay. I was in a record store. I think it was Sam Goody's, or I'm not sure where it was. And there's this picture of a house on the cover of an album cover. And it says music from Big Pink. And I'm saying, WTF is this? You know, I mean, music from a house? What is that about? It made me pick up the cover, turn it over, and on the back, there's an ugly painting. And I look at the credits when I bought it home. The credits were that Bob Dylan did the painting on the back, and the front cover was music from Big Pink on the band. So that was the only album I ever purchased because of the cover, and the only album I ever purchased. All the rest of them were given to me. I mean, when you're in the business, you don't buy albums. You get them free,
right?
And in the beginning, before I was in the business, I purchased them, but that was the only album cover I bought when I was in the business. Was the music from Big Pink, because I liked what the art director did. He made me think. I had to say, what is this about? And I picked it up. I liked Supertramp, Breakfast in America.
I know the cover well.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite albums, too. If you ask me if I was to go get an album and put it on now, I have a CD from Supertramp, Breakfast in America. I put that on. I love the songs on that album. And that one's one of my favorite covers. And The Doors' Strange Days, that Bill Harvey designed. That, to me, is one of the best album covers of all time. And it really changed the album cover industry. That year when he did that cover, the one that won the NARAS Award, the National Recording Artist, won an Emmy, or what was it, NARAS? What do they call them? Emmys or I forget what they call them. Anyway, you get a NARAS Award. Was Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Child is the Father to Man. And they had each guy in the band sitting with a picture of them as a child on their lap. That won the best album cover of the year, and it was designed by John Berg, who was Bill's contemporary at Columbia Records. And at that time, I was a member of NARAS. They asked me to be a judge, to judge album covers. And I, of course, picked Strange Days. And it didn't win. The reason that the Columbia album cover worked and won was because of numbers. Columbia has more employees than Elektra. I mean, 2 years or 3 years I was a judge, and I said, screw this, man. This is all about who's got the most votes, not what's best or the best song, or what necessarily the best song or the best art or the best anything. It's who's got the most votes. It was very political. But anyway, long story short, the art director, when I was there one day, and Bill said, hey, Bob, I just got off the phone with John Berg, the art director of Columbia, and he said he wanted to congratulate me and give me his condolences. He said I should have won the best album cover of the year with The Strange Days, but he won it. And he said he didn't deserve it. My cover was better. And that really made me feel good. At least he acknowledged that.
Bob, you hung out and smoked a joint with Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin. You watched Carly Simon breastfeed her newborn. You were the audience of one when Jim Croce privately performed his last album for you 2 weeks before he died. And you retouched an album cover for Yoko Ono. Now, we mentioned this in the open, and we got to set the record straight. Who played the guitar solo on Roadhouse Blues?
After Jim died, they remixed it, and Lonnie did that part, and they put him in, and they fudged the original recording so it wasn't a clear Lonnie, and it could have been Bobby, but it was Lonnie Mack.
Do it, Lonnie, do it.
I have pictures of him in the studio. The Doors loved Lonnie Mack. But again, it was the Doors' ego. They didn't want Lonnie Mack to get the credit when Robbie Krieger wanted the credit. And I'm not saying anything against Robbie. I love Robbie. But they changed it. They remixed it, and they did it so it sounded like Robbie. But the first year before Morrison was dead, it was Lonnie Mack on that track. That was the original track. And I know Lonnie. I was good friends with Lonnie. I knew him up until the day he died. We contacted each other. We were good friends. We were both Christians. And he told me many stories, and I know it was him. So
interesting.
Many people don't know that. Yeah. But I've got pictures of him in the studio, and I knew Paul Rothchild, their producer. And Paul, I did a logo for Paul Rothchild. He was selling Rothchild guitars. I did his logo for his company, and Paul came in and said, yeah, that's Lonnie. We brought Lonnie in. The Doors loved him. All the guys just sat around listening to his stories. And no one knows that.
And finally, Bob, if you could do just one more album cover design for just one more musician, who would it be?
The first one that comes to my mind is Carly. I like working with Carly. There was something with Carly, like me and the music. It was part of me. We had something together that's hard to describe. You know, we both trusted each other. She trusted me, and I wasn't trying to pull the wool over her eyes and sell her something. We were both on this. We were both on the same page. Every time we met and everything we did, we were always on the same page. So I would say Carly.
Wow.
Bob, what a treat. Thank you for being on Aircheck, and thank you for creating theater of the mind for our listeners to live vicariously through all your journeys with all those musicians, our heroes, whose names for most are fantasy of the past, but you gave them life.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
The book is Cover Stories, Tales of Rock Legends and the Albums That Made Them Famous, available on Amazon. A link in the show notes. It's Bob Heimall, award-winning artist, infamous Elektra Records art director, designer, and photographer. Thanks, Bob. You can follow us, stream, and download every episode of Aircheck on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Give us a great rating and share the show with a friend. You can also listen and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment, too. We'd love to hear what your favorite episode of Aircheck is.
This is Rich DeSisto.
And I'm Steve Raymond.
We'll talk to you soon.
Closing out another episode of Aircheck, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities. If you have radio stories to share, we'd love to hear from you. Join the Aircheck guest list. Email aircheckme@gmail.com. Musical props are Chris Gordon's. Announcer props, I'll take those. Greg O'Brien, the OB. Aircheck is the creation of RDPK Productions.